Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has now featured on the channel a good number of times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the last year or two. They are still a relatively new addition to the Swedish beer scene. It is a little bit difficult to pick out what style these guys are most well known for, but the beers that I've reviewed from them in the past have been very, very solid. But the one we're going to have a look at today is a style that I haven't tried from them before. It has had very good ratings, this particular beer, and I have to say I'm just curious to see how it's going to turn out. So hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to Kungsbacka, which is just to the south of Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish west coast. Remember, Gothenburg is the Swedish craft beer capital. But yeah, we go to Kungsbacka for this one, and we're going to have a look at another beer from AKiA Brygghus. So this particular beer is called Utilitarian Chocolate. It comes in at 9.5% ABV, and this one is an Imperial Stout. Now, if memory serves me correctly, we have had a stout from them before that was about 8% or something like that, and we have had maybe one or two black IPAs. This might be my 10th or so review that I've done from AKiA. But yeah, this is a beer that I just thought sounded very, very interesting. And yeah, cool to try my first Imperial Stout from them too. And like I say, they are a very well respected member of the Gothenburg-ish area craft beer scene. So yeah, I can't remember exactly when this beer was released. I've had this one for a month or two, but it was released as part of one of the Tillfälligt assortments in recent times. The Lokallt Småskaligt, my apologies, not the Tillfälligt. So yeah, this one should be quite nice. Let's crack on and see what we have from this then. Definitely nice to return to AKiA Brygghus after what feels like quite a long time, but I think in reality it's only a couple of months. But yeah, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from AKiA Brygghus before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give the channel is massively appreciated, and as always you can check out the playlists of beers from different countries, and you will find this one in the Swedish playlist. But anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about AKiA Brygghus once again. So as I've already mentioned to you, AKiA Brygghus are based in Kungsbacka, which is to the south of Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish west coast, and this brewery was founded by Christian Figved back in 2016. So he had worked as a lighting technician in the music industry, which had taken him all over the world. He was a sound engineer for Soundtrack of Our Lives, and he also worked with the Wannadies and Torstrom, who are quite famous Swedish acts, I have to say. But he travelled around the world for about 8 years, then he had children, and so he decided that he needed to stay put with his work life. So he started off working 20% in the brewery, and he brewed with a 300 litre brew kit, but he very quickly found that this was not big enough, and so he upgraded to a 1500 litre brew kit in August of 2017, which took his brewing capacity up to 40,000 litres of beer per year. But in 2018, he brewed around 10,000 litres of beer, and then he upgraded the brewery again in 2019 to further increase his capacity, and he increased it again in 2021 with the addition of a second 1500 litre brew kit. But Christian actually also has a history of letting home brewers brew at the brewery, so there are various AKiA and some homebrewer collaboration beers that you can have. But they've also just recently hired Victor N to be the brewer. So it is now him who is doing most of the brewing operations. And from what I understand, Christian is looking to grow the kind of business side of things. He's more involved in the sales and marketing and all this kind of stuff now. But the brewery itself can be found in the old Alfors mill, and the name of the brewery, AKiA, AKiA in Swedish, or AKiA in English. This is basically an abbreviation of the proper Swedish name for this old mill. But as of September 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 65 different kinds of beer according to Untappd. And like I said to you, they're quite an interesting brewery because they seem to be kind of good all-rounders, if that makes sense. I've had New England IPAs, West Coast IPAs, rye IPAs, black IPAs, a kind of milk stout, I believe it was. Yeah, we've had quite a few different beers. from AKiA Brygghus over the last kind of year or two, but they are very, very solid. One of the up-and-coming breweries in the Gothenburg area, in my opinion. So if you get the chance to try out some of their beers, I highly recommend that you do. And like I said earlier, this one caught my eye because it's a style that I haven't had from them yet. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about AKiA Brygghus for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, check out the brewery website, check out their social media. You can also check out some of my previous reviews that I've done from them. And yeah, the Untappd page will tell you about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's get on and actually have a taste of this beer. So as you can see, the artwork on this one is a little bit different from what we've had from AKiA Brygghus in the past, but here on the side of the beer you can see the AKiA Brygghus, the watermill symbol. There you can see Utilitarian Chocolate. It didn't really say anything about what types of chocolate and things they'd put into this beer, but it does contain oats and wheat actually. It would be that's one thing I would say. It would be quite nice if they maybe put a little bit of text on here about, you know, the beer itself and the hops and adjuncts and things that they've actually put into it. But like we said earlier, this one is a 9.5% Imperial Stout, so not one of the stronger Imperial Stouts we've had in recent times, but I think it should be very nice regardless. Plain silver top on the can. Let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. This should be quite interesting. I think, I'm just trying to think when the last AKiA review on the channel was. It was maybe back in May or something like that. But I'm going to say straight away, I'm already impressed with this beer when you look at the colour of it. Just look at that. That is a very black beer. Damn, very nice. So, yeah, there we go. So, we've got about, yeah, maybe 80% of the beer out into the glass, but already it looks pretty damn impressive. So, before the head disappears, we can see that this beer has about 2/3 of a frothy, I would say actually quite dark tan head there. Look at that. That's very, very nice. But you can see kind of medium-sized bubbles there. That head is going to fade away, I think, over time to be a very thin foamy layer. I can already see it starting to do that. But yeah, 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass. A few little particles of sediment in the bottom of the glass too. And I can see a few little bubbles just heading up toward the bottom of that head there. Colour-wise, as you can see, this one is pretty much black as night, ebony, whatever you want to call it. So remember, the colour of your beer depends mainly on the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. The length of your wort boil can also play a role though, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, thus you get a darker colour of beer. And when it comes to Imperial Stouts, they will quite often have, you know, 6 to 8 hour wort boils and things. That is definitely not unheard of. But yeah, when it comes to barrel aging and adjuncts and things, it's quite difficult with an Imperial Stout, at least. When you've got black malt involved, it's quite difficult to influence the colour of the beer too much. If we shine the light through this one, it does have a little touch of a chestnut edge, but like I said to you, this one is pretty black in the sense, and when it's got wheat and oats in it, that kind of helps stop light. It aids the kind of opacity of the beer. So this beer is very opaque and it's not hazy, but it's just pretty damn dark. I think that's fair to say. Yeah, other than that, I don't think there's anything else we really need to say about the appearance of this one. It's kind of as you would expect for an Imperial Stout. Yeah, head has faded away now. I think we can take a closer look at the aroma of this and see how we get on. So let's have a look at this. Very curious, I have to say. That's interesting. Straight away with this one, there's a lot, lot of toasty brown sugar. It has got quite a, it has got a little bit of chocolate to it, which is interesting when you consider the name. So there is definitely some chocolate in there. A little touch of, light fruitiness and a little bit of earthiness from the hops. I have to say, the first thing that's coming out of this beer with me, it's almost got a little bit of that kind of Maillard reaction, when you the sort of brown stuff you get on the edge of meat when you sear it and things. But it's also got a little bit of it's also got a little touch of like Bamberg Rauch smoke to it, which is kind of interesting too. It's almost got a little touch of that in there. But yeah, this is quite interesting. Very brown sugary leaning stout, this one. So yeah, aroma wise, this is very, very nice actually. Yeah, gets a thumbs up for me. And AKiA, like I say, very, respected, but still, in my opinion, up and coming brewery. So as I say, check out these guys. But that's a really interesting beer, this one, just from the aroma. So, how do we start with this? Let's break the aroma down for you then. So, backbone of the beer. You do get a little bit of that roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust. Definitely some nice, almost sweet brown rye bread coming out of this one. Yeah, sort of slightly toasty, well-fired bread crust, sweet German rye bread in there. Definitely some toasty brown sugars. There is a little bit of a woody, nutty element to this one toward the front of the nose. But again, what I'll say about this one is it doesn't jump out of the glass at you that much. It's actually got a more complex aroma to it rather than being overly pungent. I think that's fair to say. But yeah, within the kind of bready characters in this beer, you do get a little bit of an almost like Milliardy. Yeah, there's a little bit of that Milliardy, slightly rauchy German Rauch malt coming out of this one. So that's quite interesting. A little bit of that beechwood meaty kind of smoke, which I was not expecting from this beer at all. We'll see if that actually comes to pass in the aroma, in the flavour when we taste the beer. But yeah, lots of nice brown rye bread. There's a little bit of a leathery brown sugar in there. And when it comes to the brown sugars, if it's leathery, that indicates a slightly longer wort boil. I'd be curious to know what the wort boil in this beer is. But yeah, a little bit of that leathery brown sugar, a little bit of more kind of toasty, crispy brown sugar, if that makes sense as well. Sweet caramel, McVitie's digestive biscuit, and yeah, really some interesting things going on with this one. Yeah, the malt base on this is very, very nice. Yeah, lots of brown sugar. I don't get all that much in the way of chocolate out of it, which is kind of strange when it was called Utilitarian Chocolate. They're saying it is an Imperial chocolate stout. There is a little bit of a cocoa nibby sort of thing to it. You do get a little bit of that cocoa nibby dryness and maybe a more oily, 80%, 90% cocoa chocolate. There is a little bit of dark chocolate in there, but for me, it's interesting because it's actually very leathery and brown sugary and bready in a lot of ways. But the fruitiness, you do get quite a bit of fruitiness out of this one, but we'll come to that in a minute. So aroma wise, this has really got me quite interested actually. So yeah, at the back of the nose you can get a little bit more of a kind of airy, you get a bit more of an airy, doughy, a little bit more of a kind of airy, doughy, yeasty character out of the beer. On the hoppy side of things, there's a little bit more of a, there is a little bit more of a slight earthiness to it, a little bit of a floral note. You get a little bit of grassiness out of this too. This beer's actually held its hops pretty well in that sense. So yeah, a little bit of earthiness, a little bit of a wet grassiness, I would say, at the front of the nose. But again, the floral character in this beer is really quite wet too. But the more that I smell of the beer, I do actually get more and more of the chocolate. And there's a balance between like a sort of 30% cocoa milk chocolate for sure. And that comes out more towards the front of the nose. But at the back of the nose, you get the higher percentage cocoa, the sort of 80-90% dark chocolate. You really get that out of this beer. But yeah, a few elements of like a chocolate cake, chocolate brownie sort of thing. Yeah, and then on top of that, you have, you definitely have a sort of nice fruity character to this one. You've got that nice big, you've got the fruity character in this beer for me is really interesting too, because you've got like a sort of rich oily plum and a bit of a fig underpinning the whole sort of thing, but then you've got a slightly brighter blackberry note to this one. I don't get so much in the way of a sharper raisiny note out of this beer, more an oily plum and an oily fig than just with a little bit of blackberry. So the fruity component in this is very interesting. But yeah, behind that fruit you get a little bit of brownie, you get a little bit of muffin. yeah, the way that that goes together, I think, is very, very, very nice. But yeah, the more that I smell this beer, the more that I get the more I get the kind of it's like a chocolate cakey character that you get out of this one, which is really interesting. Yeah, so a really unusual aroma for me, this one, and quite different to a lot of Imperial Stouts I've had in recent times, and very different from the other AKiA beers that we've had in the past. So I think we should take a taste of this one now and see how we go on. But as I always say, take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But I think, yeah, we need to try this one now. So yeah, this is the Utilitarian, what are they calling it? Utilitarian Chocolate, an Imperial Chocolate Stout at 9.5% ABV from AKiA Brygghus in Kungsbacka, a little bit to the south of Gothenburg, Göteborg, here in Sweden. Let's get stuck in. Slange, skål, cheers. Ooh. That's nice. I'm going to say, straight away with this one, it's actually a very clean stout. And what you get with this, when you first take it in, the impact of this beer, it's very kind of clean and slightly oily and silky in a way, but then you just get little bits of bitterness, both from the malt and from the hop a little bit, just building up in this one. But then you start to get, you can really feel, when you taste this beer, you do get that nice big oily high cocoa chocolate note out of this one. So yeah, the way that this goes together, I think, is very, very nice. It's it's kind of interesting, this one. The aroma was really different to I'd say this is one of these beers where the aroma is really quite different to what you get out of the flavour. But the aroma developed quite a bit as we spent some time smelling it. But regardless, very, very good beer this, and it keeps up my my high standard that I have, I guess, for AKiA Brygghus. So this is definitely worth trying. I will say that straight away. So thumbs up to them for that. Let's try and break it down a wee bit more and just describe it more in depth for you. It really, the more that you drink of this, it gets sweeter and sweeter as well. But as I say, lovely, lovely beer. So, yeah, the middle third of your palate, nice roasty toasty backbone to the beer in a way, and it's kind of well balanced because you've almost got that slightly dry, like rye bread crust to this one, but it's not quite that sweet. So there is a little bit of toastiness, like a well-fired morning roll, something like that. So you've got that well-fired morning roll note coming out of this beer. That's the backbone of it. Toward the front of that middle third of your palate, there's a little touch of a kind of woody, nutty sort of thing going on. But that is a kind of subtlety. I would definitely say that. So yeah, a little bit of a woody, nutty subtlety to the beer, absolutely. And then on top of that layer, you do get this kind of, it's a bit hard to say, it's like a dry brown bread. It's not quite got the sweetness of rye bread, although that maybe does come out a little bit further into the aftertaste. But on top of the bread crusty layer with the little woody, nutty things in, you do have that little bit of brown bread, which I like. And then on top of that, you start to get kind of everything else out of this beer. So yeah, there is an element, it's kind of interesting. On top of the brown bread, there is a sort of layer of a slightly leathery brown sugar, but it's kind of mixed with chocolate. It's actually quite hard to pick out whether it's the chocolate that's on top of the bread or whether it's the kind of brown sugar. But just going by the mouthfeel of this beer, I don't think this has had too long a wort boil. So as I say, you get sort of a thin layer on top of the brown bread. You get this kind of thin layer of brown sugar, and it is more like in the centre of your palate, it's more like a kind of treacly molasses sort of thing if you go to the dead centre of your palate. but as you move out toward the edges of the palate, it gets a little bit more sort of leathery, and then there's almost a little touch of like a light toasty brown sugar toward the edges of the middle third of your tongue there. Absolutely. So on top of that, you do have a little bit of a kind of cocoa, you do have a nice little bit of a kind of cocoa-y chocolate coming out of the beer. So yeah, on top of the brown sugars, and I would say the brown, maybe toward the back, I think the chocolate comes out more toward the back of that middle third of your palate. So yeah, in the middle third of your palate, there's a nice oily caramel there, a little bit of biscuity sort of thing, and yeah, that all goes together really well. But yeah, toward the back of that middle third of your tongue, that's where you're getting the chocolate. You can feel the sort of cocoa nibby dryness there. Because it's interesting that the chocolate, I think, takes a little bit of time to show its face in this one. Like you get a bit of an almost slightly milky chocolate, mixing in with the brown sugars toward the front of that middle third of your palate, but then yeah, toward the back of the middle third of your palate, you get the drier cocoa nibs, and then a more sort of, I'd say about 60-70% dark chocolate. It's not the darkest of dark chocolates that you're going to come across, but it is quite interesting. If you go into the back third of your palate, then you can feel the base of that back third of your palate. You get more of that kind of roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust, and it is more bitter. Of course, bitter flavours come out on the back of the palate. Remember, sweeter flavours come out further forward. On top of that, you get a slightly taller, rye bready, grainy, brown bready sort of layer. And then on top of that, you can feel the kind of chocolate and cocoa nibs just creeping over into the back third of the palate too. But yeah, you do get that nice kind of you do get a more bitter dark chocolate toward the back of that the back third of your palate as well. It's more like an 80-90% cocoa chocolate at this point. But then on top of that, you get the kind of yeasty notes coming out of the beer. So on top of that chocolate layer, it's almost like a kind of chocolate muffin, chocolate sponge cake sort of thing. So yeah, you that's the yeasty side of the beer for me. But definitely on the back third of the palate, you can feel the flavour is taller, and then as you come further forward, it just condenses down a little bit, and the flavours squash together more. You get those more oily flavours. But I like how I do like how it goes together for sure. So again, big thumbs up to AKiA for Utilitarian Chocolate. I think this one is very, very nice actually, but quite different from the other Imperial Stouts we've had recently. I've been lucky to try some very good ones in recent times. Anyway, on the hoppy side of things then, so back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness in there for sure. As you come further forward, it gets a little touch herbal, but as you reach the front corners of the palate, you do get a little bit of that floral aromatic sort of thing out of this one. Yeah, and that is quite nice. Yeah, a little bit of floral aromatic sort of thing. Round the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and grassy. But yeah, the grassiness almost has a little bit of oiliness to it. You can often find that in Imperial Stouts. Again, this is, it's not meant to be the most hop forward of beers, but you do get a little bit of hoppy presence to it. But at 9.5%, you could age this a little bit if you really wanted to. And I think it's saying on the can, I just saw that there, 23/11/19. So by Swedish dates, it wants you to drink this beer by November, basically the later November 2023. You probably could age this a little bit more than that, and it wouldn't go off. But yeah, it's at 9.5%. Yeah, it's not at it's not in the best ABV range for aging, but it still would work. But yeah, you could probably age it for maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years at most. I wouldn't leave it more than that, to be fair. But yeah, it is nice. And the hoppy side of things, the longer you leave the beer, of course, the more the hoppy flavours will drop out. But let's focus on the front third of the palate and the fruity side of things then. So yeah, front third of your palate. The border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you've got a nice little bit of a kind of big, cakey, brown, sugary kind of vibe to this one. So you get a little bit of that almost muffiny sort of note, but it has a little bit of brown sugar there. And then the base of the front third of the palate, again, nice kind of brown bready, kind of muffiny note to it, and then on top of that, of course, you get you do get a little bit of the kind of fruity, juicy ester coming out of the beer. You actually get a bit more dried fruit out of this beer than I was expecting from the aroma, so that's quite interesting. So, at the back of that front third of your palate, yeah, there's not really a sharp raisiny note to this one, but underneath, yeah, you get a little bit of a kind of juicier plum, sort of oily fig, but then the base, when you're mixing in with the kind of bready notes of the beer, it has got a little bit of that kind of datey note to it, like a dry datey, almost, it's got, yeah, a bit of dates and prunes in the back of the front third of your palate, but as you move further forward, you get a little touch of the dry fruits kind of spread forward a little bit more. And yeah, at the kind of in the front half of that front third of your palate, there's a more black curranty note, a little bit of blackberry, and yeah, that's kind of interesting. But as I say, that kind of dry, datey, pruny sort of thing, and the kind of muffiny, brown sugary type stuff, that kind of sticks out with this beer to me. You've got a nice kind of dry, fruity, cakey sort of thing with that. And as I say, this beer, the chocolate, when there's an Imperial Chocolate Stout, it takes a little bit of time for the chocolatey notes to come out, and you get a little bit of milk chocolate behind that cakey note, and then yeah, toward the back of the palate you get a sort of more dark chocolate, 80-90% cocoa sort of thing with the beer. But I like this. I really do like this. It's quite an interesting Imperial Stout. Let's round off this one then with a look at the mouthfeel. As I said earlier, this one is actually quite clean in the way that it goes about its business. It's actually quite a silky Imperial Stout. So yeah, clean, silky, oily I think is a good descriptor for this one as well. So yeah, bottom end of full bodied for me, smooth carbonation. I've described the mouthfeel already. IBU wise, this is a bit difficult to pick out because you do get quite a bit of dryness in this, and you have to be careful. You could conflate dryness and the bitterness from the chocolate with the bitterness from the hops and things, but I would say this is maybe about a 60 IBU, 50-60 IBU Imperial Stout, but it balances the sweetness very well with the bitterness, this one. And as we said, the malt base has a bit of everything: roastiness, smoothness, sweetness, and an oily kind of character to it as well, and a bit of dryness. And the fruity side of this beer is interesting too. Nice and big and oily, but a little bit of dryness to it as well. But yeah, it gets a big thumbs up from me. I like how this, I do like how this goes together for sure. So yeah, definitely worth trying. Definitely not disappointed in this beer at all. It keeps up my strong opinion of AKiA Brygghus. So I think we can leave it at that for this one. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from AKiA Brygghus. Do give me some other beer recommendations. Chocolate stouts are always welcome, of course, as well. But yeah, this one was the Utilitarian Chocolate, a 9.5% Imperial Chocolate Stout from AKiA Brygghus in Kungsbacka, just to the south of Gothenburg. Till the next time, slange it, skaw, cheers, check out my social media, check out theirs, and we'll see you in more reviews.